Hello, Ridgefield Playhouse. I'm Cheryl Washington, host of Reel to Reel, where we spotlight real life on film. And today's feature, in honor of Women's History Month, is A League of Their Own. It's a home run classic. And I'm so delighted to have two guests who will be talking to us about this. And we're going to go beyond the story of this just now with our two guests. First, I've got Erin Carlson, who's a national best-selling culture and entertainment journalist based in San Francisco and author of 3 Hollywood history books. And I have to say, I love the titles of each one of them. The first one is I'll Have What She's Having. Now, you know where that line came from. How Nora Ephron's 3 iconic films saved the romantic comedy. Of course, that was from that wickedly fabulous movie When Harry Met Sally with Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan. And the next one is Queen Meryl, about the indomitable Meryl Streep, of course. And No Crying in Baseball, the inside story of A League of Their Own. And her work appears in various publications, including her Substack newsletter, You've Got Mail. I love that. And Sharon Reppe is also joining us. She's a psychologist by profession and author of her self-published book entitled Diamond Gals, the story of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, which breaks down interviews with some of the players. She also helped them form their Players Association, of which she is a lifetime honorary member. Thank you very much. And Sharon also was the first person to approach the Baseball Hall of Fame to implement an exhibit. Ladies, you are both so accomplished. I feel like I'm a lazy person doing this interview, but I'm going to learn so much from the two of you. And let's just get right down to business, because this movie we just saw, first of all, it came out 32 years ago, and I'm old enough to remember when it first came out. And yes, I did love it. It worked then, it works now. The fact that it is, in fact, 32 years later from the time that Penny Marshall directed the film, what are your comments and your impressions about how it has sustained through the years? What gives it that kind of sustaining factor? I'll start with you, Sharon, if you don't mind.
Well, I think the arrival of Title IX certainly helped us, and the increasing interest of girls in sports and opportunities in sports. But it's warm, it's family entertainment. It's a hidden piece of history that a lot of us didn't learn about in school, particularly those of my age. But I just think it appeals to everybody, and it's a positive story. It's a fun time. It's an amazing portrayal of women's team sports, which we didn't have many examples of in movies.
We certainly didn't. And I think this one really does, like I said, I hate to use the term again, hit a home run, but it really did. But Erin, I read in some of my research that the studios weren't that high on it at first and didn't expect it to become as much of a blockbuster as it did. What happened? You did a lot of behind the scenes research on the film. So why were they so unconvinced?
It's so funny because at the time, baseball movies were considered niche because they didn't have a lot of international appeal, because baseball is more popular here in North America, of course. But Penny Marshall, she's a self-described tomboy. She grew up playing sports with the boys in the Bronx, and she just connected to the story of the original women in the league. And when she heard about them, she's like, I've got to make this movie. And Hollywood was like, oh, who's going to see a movie about a women's baseball league that nobody knew existed and that few remember? But they wanted to work with Penny because she had directed Big, which was a sleeper surprise hit. She was the first female director to make over $100 million at the box office. And then she had directed Awakenings, which was an Oscar-nominated drama. So she had a lot of credibility, and everyone wanted to work with her.
Well, it didn't hurt that she was Gary Marshall's sister.
Oh, yeah. Penny would tell you, I'm the original nepotism baby, But she had a lot of talent to back that up. So, she started out in Laverne and Shirley. And then after that show ended, Penny was like, okay, what do I do with my life? I can't really make that transition from television into acting, because everyone thinks of me as Laverne, and they'll always think of me as Laverne. So she thought that directing would be the best opportunity to continue working in Hollywood. And making the kinds of movies and, series and things that she wanted to, and have more control over it. So yes, A League of Their Own. I don't think there wouldn't be A League of Their Own without Penny Marshall. And it all comes back to her, but it also all comes back to the original women of the All-American Girls Baseball League, so.
Well, let's talk about that, because there was very little known about that. And I have to confess that I didn't know anything about it until I saw the movie. And Sharon, you did a lot of research on this. I'd like to get some of your comments about what you learned, what you were able to unearth, if you will, because there must have been some interesting nuggets about that professional league that you were able to ascertain. So what was it? What drew you into it?
Well, I learned about it from some friends, particularly an older friend who used to go to the games. I'm in Kalamazoo. I had never heard of it. I grew up in Battle Creek, which also had a team for a couple of years. I didn't know anything about it. I was coming of age during the 50s and 60s when we were really in what I refer to as the dark ages gap in women's sports, because there was nothing available to be in team sports or competitive sports unless you went into city recreation leagues, but there was nothing in the public schools. So what I heard about this and the discussion I heard with Howard was that he used to go to all the games, and that he was saying that he thought it was semi-pro or a pro league. And I thought there was a professional league for women's baseball. I was playing softball at the time, had just been playing for about 3 or 4 years. Didn't have any opportunity to play that in school. And I just got curious about it. I thought, well, and then I was talking with someone else that I knew who said, he had seen the information about this league in the back of some baseball manuals, men's baseball manuals called Major League Baseball Facts and Figures. And they had an appendix for 5 years in those record books for the women's league. And so I got curious about this. I thought, what was this? So I went to the Kalamazoo Public Library and I started looking through microfilm. And I was thinking, when were they in Kalamazoo? Maybe late 40s, early 50s. So I'm, this is pre-computer. This is 1974. And I'm in the microfilm, going through microfilm summer pages. And all of a sudden I started seeing headlines for the Kalamazoo Lassies. They've got the Banner's sports page coverage. And, we never saw anything about women's sports in the newspapers. And I thought, what is going on here? What is this about? And so I got curious. I wanted to go meet somebody that knew something about this. So, okay, back then we had telephone books. So I'm looking through the telephone books, trying to find names of people that I saw some pictures of on the sports pages. And I find a chaperone by the name of Bobby Liebrick. And I find her phone number and I call her up and I said, I'm really interested in knowing more about this women's baseball league that you were affiliated with. And she tells me a little bit about it, said PK Wrigley was involved. And they used to travel around. They played several games. They were paid professionals. And I couldn't get together with her because she was leaving for the East Coast and going to be gone for a period of time. So then I'm struggling trying to find out, where can I get some information? So I go to the Kalamazoo Director of Sports and Recreation and said, I'm looking for, where can I talk to some people who were involved with the Kalamazoo Lassies? And he says, well, there's a coach over at Kalamazoo Christian High School who his sister played in the league. Maybe she's still in the area. So I call up the coach and he said, oh, yes, my sister Chris is still in the area. She works down at Wagner Plumbing in the office. So I call her up and I asked her if I could get together and talk to her a little bit about her experiences with this league. And she comes and I meet with her over lunchtime and she brings in all these scrapbooks. And soon I'm looking at information about Philip K. Wrigley and the Chicago Cubs management organizing this.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, aha, why didn't we know anything about this?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I'm interested in women's history at this point, and I'm like, why didn't they tell us anything about this? Are there any books on this? There were no books in the public library.
Right.
There were no research papers. There was nothing. And so I go and meet with Chris, and then I get a couple of other names, and I find out that there is a woman printer in Allegan, Michigan, which is about 40 minutes away. And she owns her own print shop, and she was involved with the league. So I call up June Pepys, and I go to meet with her, and I end up spending 7.5 hours, first at her work site where she owns a print shop, and then invited over to her house to go through scrapbooks and pictures and so forth. So what was an interest at this point is beginning to be an obsession.
An upset. Well, you know, I want to bring Erin back into this too, because Erin, that might have been sort of your trail also in terms of it being an obsession, because you ended up getting a lot of interesting behind the scenes details about the making of the movie. And I think it would be interesting to find out, what did you learn? As I read about the background, there were some things about Tom Hanks in particular, that Gina Davis wasn't initially the person who was considered for the film. I mean, you're talking about great all-star cast: Madonna, Gina, Tom Hanks, you know, and the list goes on and on. Rosie O'Donnell, of course, but not everybody was really targeted for this film. And it was an interesting way in which they were. And you also said something about Gina not being an athlete. I would love for you to talk about I think the line was something like, she ran like a duck or something like that.
That's just what a crew member told me. First of all, it's so funny. Everyone, no one knew about this league, right? But once they knew about this league, and once Penny knew about this league and wanted to make a movie about this league, every actress in Hollywood wanted to be in this movie. Every batting cage in Hollywood was filled, because whenever does a role like this come around for an actress, right? So people were like, yeah, they were like, I'm going to train, I'm going to do this. But Penny was like, no, Penny was harsh. She's like, first of all, you have to have some untapped athletic ability.
Right.
You have to be trainable. If you are not going to be in the movie. So that ruled out a lot of contenders.
Right.
So Deborah Winger was cast as the original Dottie Hinson, you know, the best player in the league in the movie. And Deborah was a good player, and she had this feistiness, and, you know, she's a terrific actress. But she left, she was fired because she had a fight with Penny over the casting of Madonna as All the Way May. Deborah thought that Madonna would tarnish the quality of the movie. She thought it was cheap stunt casting. So she left for $3 million, which I always joke that she won League of Their Own. But Gina came in 3 weeks late. Everyone had rehearsed, and she came in 3 weeks late. She had just, done Thelma and Louise, and she had won an Oscar for The Accidental Tourist. So she had a lot of prestige around her, but she did not have that, untapped athletic ability that was so visible in Deborah. So, yeah, however,
did she finally catch up?
She did. She was very good about knowing her limits. Like she'd be like, yes, please, stunt person, go in and do this shot for me. Go do the splits for me. Whereas some of the other actresses playing the Rockford Peaches, they'd be like, no, I'm going to do this stunt. I want to do all my own stunts. But Gina was like, no, I'm good. But she was really good at projecting excellence.
Okay.
Like she had that steely game face, right? And that stance. You believed that she was the best player in the league. And looking back at her, like on the big screen, like I saw the movie at the Balboa Theater in San Francisco recently. And so I saw Gina's face on the big screen for the first time since like 1992.
Wow.
And she would look to me like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator. She looked like a superhero. And, you know, Rosie O'Donnell called her Gina the Machina because she had that stoicism. You know, I thought she was just a fantastic role model. And no man could see that movie and not be impressed, you know.
Wow.
You know, it's like watching the real league. Like, those girls can play.
I love that because I mean, there's just so many funny aspects to the behind the scenes nature of a movie. You never know. And there probably was like a little bit of rivalry, even that I would think that was somewhat similar to the Dottie character and the Kit character. I would imagine because that was some major star power, some major women star power for that time.
Oh, right. Madonna's amazing. She doesn't always like to share the spotlight.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure.
So there were some funny stories about her behind the scenes, like kind of stealing other people's props and ideas. But anyway, but she's amazing and she's a trailblazer. And I think her role as All the Way May was the best thing she's ever done on screen.
Right.
Yeah, I have stories for days.
I'm sure
the ball players didn't think she was much of an athlete, though.
Yeah.
Sharon, let me ask you this because I mean, we talk about feminism, and I have to almost jump a little bit ahead of the movie because, you know, recently, obviously, we know how stellar Barbie was with the dynamism of Greta Gerwig, and I can't help but think about. I don't want to draw a comparison, but do you see any similarity in terms of how the League of Their Own was directed and made and conquered vis-a-vis Barbie in this modern day period? Do you see anything that might come across as the feminism aspect, as the aspect of how we see our contemporary nature of filmmaking? Is there any similarity, Sharon, that you can point out that you can see?
Well, you know, I don't know. That's not really my area of expertise. But you know, certainly a lot of feminists were interested in the new Barbie, and you know, and
they were interested in League of Their Own.
You know, got the jokes and recognized certainly what was going on. And you know what the new Barbie makes me think of is Charm School for the ball players, and the first 2 years of the All-American League. And you know, what were their impressions of Charm School? You know, Dottie Schroeder, who was the only woman that played all 12 years in the baseball league, said, "Oh, you know, it was a joke." You know, but you know, we had to do it. That was part of their PR. That's how they were promoting the league. And you know, Irene Hickson, whose nickname was Tuffy, who was from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and a catcher, said, you know, some of us didn't look any better in makeup than we did before the makeup. And you know, and how are you going to keep makeup on when you're sweating and you're slating?
Exactly.
And
well, even the uniform on top of that, Sharon, right?
But again, it was, you know, it also was, you know, it was helping create poise. And some of them recognized that they were now out in the universe where they were totally unfamiliar. Most of these women, you know, this was Depression area working class kids, a lot of these women, and they were not used to being out in the public. Right. And so they recognized that, you know, getting a little more poise or knowing what to do was helpful. Dottie Kamenchek at the first reunion she said, you know, I thought it was helpful because she said, I was from a poor family. We never even went out to eat. You know, and then I'm in the public eye and we go to these hotels and these fancy restaurants. She said, it taught me how to know what forks to use. Yeah. She said, I didn't even know, you know, how to conduct myself. And so it was useful in that aspect. And some of them appreciated the fact, and it helped them because they had to do publicity interviews and they were in the public eye and they had never had that experience. I mean, Dottie Schroeder, when she went in the league, was 14 years old. And that helped. And chaperones helped. People laugh sometimes when you say that there were chaperones running the teams, but chaperones helped.
But I think that it also taught them, Sharon and Aaron, a tremendous sense of self-confidence,
yes,
and independence. I mean,
yes,
obviously that they must have felt that they had contributed to the war effort. And so here they are. They're not just housewives. I mean, they're making a tremendous impact.
Yes. Well, they're also making good income. And, you know, there was a study done a few years ago about the league, and 35% of them were able to support going to college and get college degrees, where women in general at that time, there were only 8% that were getting college degrees. So, I mean, really that gave them that pushed them on their way, gave them the independence, gave them the confidence, also gave them money. The average salaries at the time were about $35 to $40 a week. They were starting out at about $55 a week to $150 a week. So that was a tremendous boost for all of them.
Yeah, for sure. Aaron, I read also, because you've identified a lot with Dottie, to the point where, well, I'm going to let you tell the story. Wasn't there a song that you sang or something when you were in 7th grade? And there was something that led you to almost identify wholly with her, right?
Oh, well, so I first saw the movie when I was 12.
Okay.
With my friends in 7th grade. And we loved this movie. We just really, really loved this movie. And we hadn't really seen women ball players, acting like we did on the playground. They were funny, they were loud, they were mouthy, they were sporty. So when they sang the victory song, which was a real song, written by women in the league, we would sing that at recess at the top of our lungs. So I knew, I just know every single word, and that song drove the crew of the movie nuts, because they heard it so many times, doing so many takes, because Penny Marshall would do like 100 takes of the same scene. So they're like, I don't want to hear that song anymore, but I could hear that song every day. I just love that song. I will never get tired of it. So I loved the female friendship, the camaraderie. There were role models. I feel like women or girls my age, we grew up with like boy movies. Boys were starring in the sports movies, and boys were the heroes of every movie. So we identified with these boy characters because we had no choice, but rarely were we represented on screen.
Right.
And my favorite thing was when little boys saw this movie, and grown men, they identified with Dottie, and her dilemma, and her coming into her own as a leader on the ball field.
For sure.
And so everybody relates to this movie.
For sure.
And that's what I love about it too.
For sure. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask about that iconic line. There's no crying in baseball. Where did that come from? How did that end up in the movie? And clearly that is going to be a line that we will remember forever. So what's the backstory of that line?
So one of the greatest lines in movie history, most quoted. It came from the writers, Lowell Gans and Babaloo Mandel, and they're the screenwriters of the movie. And they sit across from each other and write scripts and just kind of yell lines at each other and spitball and just write it down freehand. So they were yelling, "There's no crying. There's no crying in baseball," back and forth. And that became Jimmy Dugan's monologue. And they needed the right actor to take that bit and run with it. And Tom Hanks was like, "Can I play Jimmy Dugan, please?" And Penny Marshall was like, "You've just had 5 flops. you're no one really wants to work with you in Hollywood now. And Tom Hanks was like, please forgive me for Joe versus the volcano. And so Penny was like, all right, you can play Jimmy Dugan, but you're too cute for this role. So he kind of transformed into this coach past his prime. And the day that they shot that scene with Bitty Schramm, who played the poor woman on the receiving end of his rant, they didn't know, because Penny was so kind of scattered. I mean, she was an excellent director, but she's like, okay, we're going to film this scene now. So nobody was really prepared. They took Bitty Schramm out of her trailer and she was terrified. So when she's crying, when Hanks is yelling at her, those are real tears.
That was real.
She was only like 22. And this was her first movie. And she has Tom Hanks yelling at her. And so she cried every time, though, because she's like, I have talent, too. So I can cry on cue. Plus, I was also really crying. But Hanks just killed that. The moment the studio saw the dailies, they started printing out T-shirts that said "There's no crying in baseball" because they knew
they had to hit with that line, right? And that delivery. No one else could do it.
Yes.
Right. Sharon, I talked earlier about how you became this honorary member, lifetime member. Tell me what it was like for you to join that league, because you ended up doing something really quite believable and quite substantial in softball history. I'll put it that way. I'm giving you a lot of kudos here, but tell me how you entered into that aspect of playing.
Well, I didn't join the league per se. What I did was help found the Players Association, which became the modern league for the retirees. And that came about because I had been trying to convince Cooperstown to do an exhibit. Mm-hmm. And I had an agreement from one of the historians late in the 70s that they would do an exhibit if I could get together memorabilia for them. And then a couple of years later, he was gone. He was no longer at the Hall of Fame. And in the early 70s, I had gone to Cooperstown and I had met with him, and we had had some agreement, but then he was no longer with them. The new person who was in charge was Ted Spencer. And he said, when I talked to Ted, I went back to Cooperstown again, and I actually took a ball player with me who had become a friend. And I was on my way to a North American Society for Sports History conference to do a paper on the baseball league. And then we went to Cooperstown, and I met the new director, and he said, well, I didn't know anything about this arrangement to have a display. And he didn't know if they had any memorabilia. So I handed him a set of the baseball cards that I had started producing about the league. And I gave him the booklet, Diamond Gals. And we talked, and I introduced him to the ball player. And then he remembered that he had been taught by a woman by the name of Mary Pratt out in Boston, Massachusetts. And Mary Pratt had played in the league. And so we had sort of piqued his interest. And he said, well, we don't know. We'll probably do something about this sometime. Well, I felt a little discouraged leaving the Hall of Fame. Because I felt like they no longer were maintaining a sense of commitment about doing something. So a few years later, when the first reunion took place in Chicago, and then there was a reunion in Fort Wayne, a second reunion in 1986. And before that, I had started circulating petitions to get the Baseball Hall of Fame to recognize the accomplishments of women in baseball and the league and the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And I had urged people in the back of my book to contact Cooperstown.
Mhm.
And I was going out to a number of organizations trying to get them to lobby Cooperstown. And so when it came to the 86 reunion, there were about 75, 80 of the ball players there, maybe more. It was part of an organization called Run Jane Run, which was a women's sports event in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I said, you know, the only way this is going to happen, I was talking to them individually. I was selling some baseball cards. And I said, the only way this is going to happen is if the players as a group start approaching the Hall of Fame and get organized.
Mhm.
And so when we left that reunion, about 6 of us had agreed to meet at Fran Jansen, former ball player for South Bend, at her home in a few months and talk about forming an organization. And so that's what we did. We essentially created the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League Players Association. And then things started to move. And then the word went out because June Pepys had been doing a newsletter that we needed memorabilia. And then all of a sudden there was an LA Times article about the Women's League. And there were some other things starting to bubble up.
Mhm.
And so Cooperstown started to pay attention. And the National Baseball Hall of Fame, which at that time looked like only the National Baseball, Men's Baseball
Mhm.
Hall of Fame, started to think broader and discovered maybe they could include women.
Not a bad thought, right?
Yeah. You know, it's just like it took them a few years to get to the Negro Leagues. Now, they still haven't gotten far enough as far as I'm
Right.
concerned.
You know, I'm actually glad that you mentioned that because I know that we're getting a little pushed for time, but I do want to ask you this one question since you brought that up about the Negro Baseball League. Was there a no blacks policy when it came to this league? Because I was trying to do some research on that. Did that happen?
I never saw it. Only myself and Mary Fiddler since the 70s have ever been in the Wrigley Meyerhoff files that were the league files. And we don't even know where those are now. I never saw any policy saying that.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean there wasn't a color line.
Right. Yeah. Well, there was one shot in the movie.
Never saw a policy, never saw anything in the rules. You know, I saw some of the training instructions. I don't know.
Right. Okay.
But it was cultural.
Yeah.
Cultural. There was that line.
Right. For sure. For sure. Okay. I know we're about to wrap up. Erin, I'm going to have you have a final line about this movie. What do you think makes it stand out today? And what can we say to young girls, young women about how they can look to this movie as inspirational?
Gina Davis always says, if you can see it, you can be it. So this film continues to resonate 30 years on because it's an original film. It's funny. It has these fantastic performances, especially from Gina and then Tom Hanks and then Lori Petty. But it stands for something, you know, it inspires you. It makes you feel good. Yeah. And it really, really did have an effect on women in sports. Like it had an immeasurable effect and influence. And as long as people continue to watch it and share it, as long as it's playing on cable somewhere, it always is, you know, it's going to find new fans and be cherished forever.
Well, we're happy that the Richfield Playhouse had the insight to come across this brilliant movie and to play it during Women's History Month, because I think it will speak volumes for bringing about more conversation among women. And perhaps there will be some more inroads that will be made in the minds of how women can continue to thrive in softball and in baseball and other entities of sports. I really do want to thank you both for joining us, because this was a delightful conversation. The movie clearly has so many emotions. I mean, there are times when you cry through it, but there are more moments when you just laugh and you feel good. And that's what we need now anyway, don't we?
We do. And I will say it is like, it's more powerful on the big screen. Yeah. So whoever's watching it today, they're so lucky. It's wonderful.
Thank you. I want to thank you both, Sharon and Erin, for joining us. The Richfield Playhouse thanks you. And everybody, make sure that you take a moment to just really enjoy it, because it really is quite an extraordinary movie. And yes, you will feel good about it. Thank you, ladies. And we want to, of course, thank the Richfield. I should say we want to thank the Aquarian Water Company for sponsoring this Beyond the Story feature. They're always so wonderful when it comes to what we're able to do with this reel-to-reel movie series. So I thank you. I'm Cheryl Washington. I will be with you the next time we gather. Ladies, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.